Hello and welcome to episode 51 of Future of XYZ. Hard to believe it's been a year and that we're right up against Thanksgiving. And with us today, talking about something very important to the holiday season, is Lebawit Lily Girma of Skift. And Lily, thank you so much for joining us on Future of XYZ.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm so excited because travel and tourism is something that has really shaped who I am and how I live my life. And as we come up on the holiday season, kind of 2 years before the last time we had a normal holiday season, I think it's really material to talk about the future of tourism, something you know a lot about, obviously, as the global tourism reporter at Skift. So let's just dive into it a little bit before we talk a little bit about how you got to where you are and really where the future is going. But it is the holiday season. 2 years ago in 2019, we had a normal season. Then we had like COVID pandemic holidays. Where are we now versus where we were last year or pre-pandemic in terms of tourism?
So Lisa, it's actually incredible to see just how far we've come since the pandemic hit. It's been so much happening in the last almost 2 years, actually, since the pandemic hit in March 2020. But where we are now is, well, we have vaccines. That was a game changer for the tourism industry. So compared to, say, last summer, we're talking a completely different scenario now where a lot more people are out there traveling, at least, in the US, Europe, which, have been ahead of the vaccine distributions, as well as other parts such as, Israel and the Middle East and parts of South America. So people are back on the road again, and we're not seeing that sort of, excitement to be out again waning. I think like even in September in the US, even though the Delta variant hit, people were still, I think almost 50% Americans were out there. So on the road. Of course, it's been a lot more, backyard tourism than international still. So I think for the holidays, we're going to see a lot more people traveling. And, also, they just approved the Pfizer vaccines for kids, between 5 and
12,
11, I think.
Yeah,
5 and 11-year-olds. And so that's really opening the door for families. It's not going to be all at once, but at least, by Thanksgiving, we'll see a lot more sort of family reunions, family trips. Yeah.
And Thanksgiving is such an American holiday, but it is typically, historically, the one where people are traveling and certainly on the road more than any other. What do we anticipate, as families get back together? What are the trends kind of in tourism this Thanksgiving season? Then I want to talk about kind of Christmas and beyond.
So I think that the trends are definitely going to be, a lot of sort of more leaning towards everyone being vaccinated, a meeting at the table. I know that there's still issues with that. As you know, in the US, we still have vaccine resistance. So I think that there will be family reunions. We'll see people who are definitely eager and ready to meet. And then we'll see another bunch who are perhaps not so eager to have a whole lot of people indoors. And might be instead heading outdoors, wherever possible, depending on where they live, obviously, because of the weather. But and then in terms of traveling overseas, I think that the Caribbean region is certainly going to see an ongoing increase of people, looking for that beach, sand, sea, tropical weather, places like Florida. And, it's interesting because folks who are traveling from the US, for example, there's a significant percentage who look for destinations that have low restrictions.
Yeah.
They have safety protocols in place, but they don't have a million requirements to get in because no one wants to deal with that headache anymore. So, countries like where I am actually presently in the Dominican Republic are going to be very well placed for that. And of course, there's the issue of vaccine equity, but I know we'll talk about that later, probably.
Yeah, because to your point, the vaccine has actually been the catalyst that allows tourism to recommence. And, we will talk about that kind of the destinations and then the unequal distribution or the, lack of equity, if you will, in distribution between the developed and developing worlds. I do think it's interesting as we get to the holidays, and I'm going to take my own first international trip, and I'm so excited about it. I'm going to Europe.
Nice.
Where I usually spend quite a bit of time, and it's been 2 years, we'll have been over 2 years. And that is so meaningful to be able to reconnect with friends and family. And, we've all been so disconnected if you have this international life. And I know, Lily, I mean, you started your career as a corporate attorney. And then at some point you were like, no, travel and tourism is my jam, and I'm going to become a travel journalist. And you've been published in all the major publications, and before even coming on, as global head of tourism at Skift. I mean, you're multicultural, you've lived all over the place. I mean, you've traveled all over the place even further. I mean, what do you think is the most exciting thing that you foresee in terms of the trends in tourism that are going to, that were happening before COVID perhaps, but are even going to accelerate coming out?
That's such a great question, Lisa. What I'm most excited about, and I have to say, you hit the nail on the head there when you said that was even happening before COVID, and it was the sort of wave towards sustainable tourism, traveling more consciously, traveling in a way that your dollars and your trips go to benefit, local communities. That was out there before, but I think that since the pandemic, certainly in the last year, more and more tourism companies have been stepping up and saying, we want to rebuild in a different way. We don't want to have to be part of this, wasteful, super abundant kind of tourism industry that, tramples on the places that they visit. And how do we change that? And that conversation has been going. And I'm very, very excited to see that it's remained steady among, a certain group of companies. I'll say about maybe 300 companies, which actually also this week, just yesterday, came together and decided to take climate action finally, and are speaking in one voice, and hopefully more will sign on. But I think that there's this collective realization that things just can't go back to the way they were. We need to be more, live on a planet that is obviously self-destructing because of human behavior. And we know we have scientific data, and also communities. It's just been, like I said, trampled on, and tourism benefits haven't been going to, have been benefiting governments and have been benefiting, stakeholders, but not the actual people who are providing experiences. So I think that shift that's happening is here to stay. More and more travelers are asking the right questions, want to know, how they're impacting on their trips, have fun, but at the same time do it in a way that isn't negatively impacting the places that they stay in.
Absolutely. And I think something, again, when given both of our own backgrounds, I think we're predisposed to assume that many people travel like we do, which is like really trying to get embedded, if you will, into the local culture in an authentic and connective way. So much more micro, experiences than the macro. Do you see that?
Absolutely. I do see happening that with some companies, my colleague Rashad covers tour companies, but we have seen them replacing, let's say, short haul flights with walking and biking itineraries. We're seeing the smaller smaller cruise experiences growing, becoming more popular, more niche. We're seeing also partnerships with, community-based tourism, which really just means that you're going to a place and the host community is offering the service, selling the service. And so we're seeing more companies partnering with them or providing them with training and capacitating. And so I think that there are a lot more options today for consumers than there used to be. It's still not mainstream, but I think that we're getting there. Yeah.
Which is so exciting, actually, when you think about, it. And I think with the rise of technology, to some degree, people have access to language apps and at least can make headway a little bit differently. You can also get some more research done. But it's interesting. I have my own tourism experience, and you have lots of players who can create these bespoke experiences if you have that money or desire or a specialized interest. But one thing I've noticed in my own travel experience, again, pre-COVID, is because of
Yes.
the internet that lives in our pockets through our telephones. I find that I actually do less research than more. And I find myself, because that on the ground, you can just pull up a map and you can find your way. You don't need to know as
Right.
much, whether that's local tourism or
Yeah.
whether that's very far afield. Is that a trend that we're also seeing, which is people are more like, I want to say ambulatory. They're just kind of cruising and less structured, or do you think more people are using it, to really dive deep and be like, I want this, restaurant on this day and this experience?
I wish that was more of the trend of being able to just, go and show up and figure it out. The percentage of people doing that is very small, at least if we're talking about Americans. I think that especially given the current, the current uncertainties that we're seeing still because of COVID, the million restrictions, we still have a lot of restrictions to go to a place. And so I think that, and changing conditions like all the time, you never know, which country is suddenly going to decide to shut their borders again. And maybe that won't happen anymore, but at least there will be potentially more curfews, as cases are going up. So basically, I think that people are actually a lot more choosy right now and conscientious of what decisions they're making in terms of like, should I go here or there, and what's open, what's not. And I think that there's a lot more planning required now. And that's why I think also more people, well, statistics show that more and more, even younger generations are resorting to travel advisors at the moment. So maybe when that wave passes, but I think that social media has just dominated travel and lives so much that I don't see that sort of disappearing anytime soon. They might avoid the influencer type of post, but folks definitely look online to see, I wonder what it's like there right now.
Yes.
And well, that immediacy.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, there is obviously, because of the restrictions, because of COVID, it's a little different, or a lot different, obviously, than before. We need to know those things ahead of time.
Yes.
What are some of the other trends that we're seeing that you think are going to stick around? I mean, I think about obviously during COVID, people, drove places more than they flew or trained. Do we think that this is going to stay, or do you think people are just really, like, even people who didn't before, are chomping at the bit to get on a plane and go somewhere, quote unquote exotic, like much further afield?
Not yet. I think that definitely the driving trend is going to continue. The backyard tourism trend is going to continue for a little while longer, particularly because of these ongoing sort of, patchwork restrictions in different regions. So I think that people are still going to stick to their own sort of, countries or areas. In Europe, they're going to keep traveling around Europe. There will be a small percentage of international. I think the latest percentage was something like 3% or maybe just under 4% of Americans who are now going overseas, which is considerably low still, if you think about it.
That's wild.
Yeah, and other trends, is continuing to go into national parks and rural areas and seeking out the beachside and just the outdoors. There's this huge demand still for being in nature and connecting and just being away from anything that is, that keeps you confined. And then other trends, obviously VFR, which is visiting friends and family, I think will dominate leisure for quite some time to come, which makes sense. People have been separate, like you said. I mean, right? It's the catch-up time. Yeah, it's catch-up time. And at the same time, I think going into 2022, some of that, international pent-up demand is going to keep unfolding, and people are going to want to do more and bigger and greater things. I think that wellness is going to be huge, wellness travel.
I want to talk about that for a second, because I think, you're talking about being outdoors, right? Like there's this huge movement towards the outdoors. There's growing awareness of, like, we won't call it ecotourism, but like sustainable tourism, right? And doing a little less harm. And then there's this wellness, like this confluence of things, right? That actually suggest the opposite of what is happening to our planet, which is massive climate change and the negative impacts. And obviously also the wealth inequality that is, by country as well as by, community. What's so interesting to me about what you're saying about this confluence, and I'm putting them together, is
Yeah.
that people are more aware. And so when you go traveling, presumably, if this is a trend, more people are asking the right questions. They want to be healthy. They want to do things outdoors. How is that impacting, kind of the call to action, if you will, when you go to a place? I mean, yes, the tourism industry is adapting, but are governments adapting to this? Like, what else comes from it, do you think?
Yeah, I think that, well, depending which region we're talking about, right? So I think that certainly in areas that are super tourism dependent, like the Caribbean, there's a tendency to sort of, you'll have a pocket of tourism businesses that will want to move towards that whole sustainability, and which it really is the future, climate change awareness and all of that. But I think that the challenge will be governments, because at the end of the day, governments are looking at their coffers and their bottom lines and bringing in investment. And so there's got to be pressure placed and accountability. And that will only come when, businesses come together, tourism industry comes together, and the consumer puts pressure as well and saying, well, you're not offering me what I want, and I'm going to this other place,
Yeah. Or your beaches are so decimated from trash or pollution that like
or
tenable.
Exactly, as we see more and more destruction, because as we know, that's definitely coming.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's going to get worse and worse. And as areas like Lake Tahoe, unfortunately, in Germany, the richer corners of the world get hit, I feel like that's going to continue as well. And then maybe more eyes will be open then, and they'll be like, oh my God, it's in our backyard. It's not in some remote poor country that no one cares about, so I think that it's taken a lot longer than it should have, but I think that there's definitely a growing sense of, I want a better lifestyle, life is short. I want to work remotely. I want to, spend more time with my family if I can. I want to do those things that I never did, before COVID. And so all of that shift in societal consciousness, the Black Lives Matter protests that we saw at a level that we've never seen before. It's just the beginning, I think.
I was just going to say, let's hope that it's just the beginning. I mean, there's a lot of change that needs to happen still on that.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, it's interesting when we think about it, so I know you spent a lot of time. I mean, you pivoted your career through, Sun and Stilettos is your handle for your travel.
Yeah, I can't get rid of that ever. Everyone knows me as Sun and Stilettos.
I love it. I mean, Sun and Stilettos is so perfect, but you went down to Jamaica and then started a company, in the Caribbean. I mean, I think that's an interesting destination. We have so many destinations, but like, let's just use the Caribbean. I mean, it is a Sun and Stilettos kind of place, but like, what are the activities in conjunction with this growing awareness that are happening? I mean, what are we seeing in terms of like shifts in that, and what do we see coming down the pipeline that are activities that might be different than we saw either pre-COVID or just in the history?
Actually, Lisa, it's so interesting, because those kinds of different kind of greener social activities, social sustainable tourism activities were happening, and there was a push beginning in the Caribbean and the tourism industry before COVID, just before COVID. In fact, just 6 months prior, I had attended a sustainable tourism conference in St. Vincent, bringing together all of the folks who care about this sort of thing around the Caribbean, all the experts. And then I myself, as you said, when I went to Jamaica, I realized that there was this whole other side to the way that you could experience the region, and that no one was either marketing properly or talking about or even posting anywhere. It was always the image of the Caribbean, that's sort of a mass tourism, all inclusives and all of that, right? So I realized also by staying there long term and being a digital nomad, I began to understand the economics of tourism and the disparities, of tourism, as far as who benefits from all of this money that's being spent coming to the Caribbean.
And there's a lot of money.
And the leakage is insane. And leakage is basically something like over 80% of the money that, say, a US traveler pays for a packaged trip to the Caribbean goes primarily to multinationals and doesn't even run through the local economy. I mean, and the argument is always, well, it provides jobs, it's hundreds of people hired per resort and whatnot, but what kind of jobs, and what are they getting paid, and what's the conditions?
What are the conditions? And
no one talks about that. But to go back to your original question of the types of activities, there were so many incredible activities I discovered over the 10 years that I specialized in as a travel writer. On the Caribbean, everywhere from Belize to Jamaica and so on. And those are things like, visiting a permaculture organic farm where you get to, hike and learn about the ecosystem of the island, growing your own food, what they grow there and why it's important. You have a climate action school in St. Vincent that you can visit as well, that give you a one-on-one on, sustainable living, in the islands, and also educate locals as well as visitors. And you tour all of their facilities, their use of biogas. What does that even mean?
Amazing.
And then they take you hiking to nearby waterfalls and you visit a community that leads their own tours and tells you about the Afro-Caribbean history of that island. There were a lot of just incredible and still incredible experiences before COVID hit. Unfortunately, not many people knew about it. Now I'm seeing this sudden interest in businesses developing that kind of stuff, and also food-related experiences.
Food related, right? Food.
Huge.
The easiest access point, right? And
yes.
and we've all become, not all, many of us have become so much more conscious of what we consume in terms of the food and beverages. And it's, of course, the closest tie, besides language, to a culture.
Exactly.
So if you can make that bridge, it feels like I'm so glad we got here, because to me, that seems like the most obvious entry point for sustainable tourism, or any kind of tourism, to have a true, authentic experience.
Absolutely.
And as we think about wrapping up, I mean, one of the things, and I looked ahead to, the holidays, Thanksgiving this week, Christmas coming after, then 2022, and hopefully as one of my guests recently, the former infectious disease head for the CDC said, we're moving towards an endemic and not a pandemic, and of course, vaccine equity will have something to do with that, but we will be able to start traveling again in a very major way if that is what we choose. How do we engage with, I want to say, indigenous populations, but also local populations? They are two not necessarily exactly equal things. What is the role, and I want to just ask it, of getting to know indigenous populations when we're traveling without, again, having a negative impact on wherever they live, whatever the culture is, and really, it's the Anthony Bourdain model of elevating this, this specialness and the uniqueness of each community, no matter how far off the beaten path.
I'll tell you how I approach these things. I think that first and foremost, we need to remember that these are places that people live in. It's their home. And we need to think of it as, how would I want somebody to come to my home and act? Second, I think that when you travel to a place, really, you give deference to the people and to the environment of that place. So in other words, you don't ask yourself, how can I do better? It's go to the source, find the, as you said, say the specific indigenous culture that you want to experience, and see how they suggest that you experience their culture. How do they suggest that you sign up for tours, and go with what they say, because they live there and it's their home, and just acknowledge that. And also I want to say that there's a lot of sort of saviorism mentality that is projected very often from travelers from places like the US and Europe. And they're like, well, I want to go there because, they need my tourism dollars, or, I can help elevate them, as you said, but they're already elevated, that we need to start changing our mindset and just think of, yes, tourism dollars influence and matter for economic growth for these communities, but at the same time, it's not a handout. We're getting an exchange. for something that is extremely valuable, even if you don't see it in dollars. It's finite. It's something that is passed on from generation to generation, and that we are having a privilege to experience. And so it's an equal exchange, and we're on equal footing, And so I think that sort of mentality really needs to grow more, and we just need to change our language and our perception of others going forward.
I really can't imagine, frankly, a better summary of the future of tourism. which is really, I'm like, could you have wrapped that in a nicer bow? But I agree, Lily, and I'm so grateful for you joining us and sharing your passion and your expertise on the future of tourism. I mean, it really is about the human experience and sharing and respecting that, one-on-one. And as we come out of this very trying time and the world reopens, whether we can hold on to the lessons we've learned and move, towards a much more sustainable, respectful travel and tourism in the future would be my hope. And it sounds like, that's what you're seeing as movement.
I hope so. I know that there's there are some viewpoints that say, well, it's very, it's kind of not getting there, because tourism at its very heart is an extractive kind of industry. And but I think that we can counter that, and I think that we should counter that, and change. We can change.
We can change. Well, thank you for joining us on this week's
so
Thanksgiving week episode.
Yes, excited to see what's going to happen. Thank you so much, Lisa. It's really, truly a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Lily. And for everyone listening, have a very happy Thanksgiving, and make sure that you catch up on the first 50 episodes and 1 year of Future of XYZ. We've covered a lot of ground. It's been a privilege and an honor to speak with people like Lily and share their expertise with all of you. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube, listen wherever you get your podcasts, leave us a 5-star review, and follow on Instagram at Future of XYZ. We will see you after Thanksgiving in America, and the week after back on our normal Thursday scheduling, and have a very happy one. Thanks again, Lily.
Thank you, Lisa. I just want to add, everyone also go to skift.com for more on the business of travel. Thank you.
Thank you.